Hi there. Today I'm with Austin Minnich, who is a professor of engineering from California. And we're going to further delve into the issues of solving all the world's problems, basically. So, Austin, it's lovely to meet you.
Thank you. Very
Give us a
happy to be
few.
on. Thank you.
Very welcome. Give us a bit of your background. What made you think to start discovering these solutions to the world's problems?
Well, it started for me a few years ago, initially with something very mundane, which is California's tax challenges. Uh, California has a wildly fluctuating tax base because it's based on income tax, and it's good in the sense that it's progressive, so it's skewed towards those who have the most money. But that means that tax base is subject to the fluctuations in the stock market, in the economy, and so on. And so every year we have very different amounts of money actually available for government. And of course, that makes it difficult to have a stable source of services provided by the government. And so I got to thinking, there must be a better origin or source of this tax base. And that got me thinking to land values, which of course are much more stable. That was one part of it. But the other part of it, which was quite important, is just trying to make sense of our political situation that all of us are in over the whole world. And I grew up in the 90s and 2000s, which is a period now that we can think back of relative calm. And if I think to what I was taught in public elementary school and so on about the world, then what was happening shouldn't be happening. We should have the end of history, political stability forever. But we didn't, right? So that made me think, something that I was taught is not quite right. And so I started looking around, and fortunately we have the internet, so there's lots of information out there. But those kind of two factors eventually led me to Henry George. And it's very interesting, just to finish the thought, Henry George was a major figure in the United States and globally. He is not in any textbook that school kids get in this country. I'd never heard of him until I started looking around.
Absolutely. I mean, I'd never heard of Henry George until I went on the same journey as you have. So I started understanding Georgism and read. And when I read his book, it's a tough read, it's in an arcane language, but it was so beautiful, so morally perfect. And I also, the people who I met who understood these concepts of economic rent and Henry George were basically always the smartest guys in the room. You can see that Einstein said Henry George's philosophy was the most perfect moral philosophy he'd ever read. It's literally every great mind comes to Henry George, but it's been removed. Nobody can find it. It's
Yeah.
invisible.
And I'll be honest, I have not yet made it through Henry George's book.
It's a tough read.
It's dense. It's written in old language that it's a bit hard to just pick up and get through. And so I've relied on YouTube videos from you and Fred and others to understand things better.
Well, there are some translations into more modern text. There was one done in the 80s. So there are, but you can't go back to, because I've read a lot of early scientists, in my profession, ecology and population modeling and all that. But I love reading, the original works by old scientists who discovered things. Yeah. So Darwin or Mendel or whoever, there's a certain beauty of the language that explains things that translators don't get. You've got to get into the mind. And I would recommend everybody to struggle at finishing Progress and Poverty.
Yes.
Because in there lies, back in the 1870s, he basically wrote the solution to every single problem we face. The environmental problem, the population issue, progress, and the abolition of poverty. Every single thing was explained in a way that is, as I said to you before, it's about understanding what is causal, what actually solves the problem. And for people who've got a scientific training like ourselves, or economics training or mathematical training, they work it out that what he spoke was absolute truth, if truth can be such a thing. But yeah. So this brings us on to where you come from, and I'm really interested in hearing your assessment, because I come from across the pond. All we hear about California is, on one side, you basically own the world through your tech monopolies and, Silicon Valley, and you've got fantastic beaches, but your farmland's basically draining all the water. You're producing walnuts and peanuts and fruit that is basically causing the land to be degraded very badly. And you're full of homeless people who are, living on the streets in utter abject poverty as the world's richest billionaires and now trillionaires drive by in their self-driving electric cars. Is that a good assessment, or?
It's a sad thing, but that is a remarkably accurate assessment of many aspects of California, I have to say. California, as you know, is where Henry George is what he originally observed. As how could there be so much progress yet so many people can't meet their basic needs, right? And here we are 150-ish years later, and it's a different setting, but the same story, really. We have tech billionaires and trillionaires, and we have Skid Row, where there's just people, as you say, abject poverty. And so this is a very present issue in our mayoral race. It was, and this is not a new thing, it's a constant debate. Why are so many people unable to meet their needs? There's some people who say, well, it's the housing, there's not enough housing. Some people who say they're all drug addicts and there's no hope, we should just put them all in jail. And that's been essentially the argument for at least 80 years. And our newspaper, the LA Times, had an article recently about all the things we've tried to deal with homelessness. And, the summary is nothing worked. It maybe tweaked things around the edges, maybe it got 10% better this year and then got a little bit worse later. But that was influential to me, because what it indicates is that whatever the knobs that are being turned to try to address this problem, they're not the right ones. Because we're investing to the tune of hundreds of millions or billions of dollars, right, in this problem, and it's not getting the amount of improvement is not what you'd expect, and people get frustrated, and so that definitely was one of the things that got me thinking, how could this be possible, and that led me exactly to Henry George.
So, I've explained this so many times, why the Henry George solution works. But how do you think, if we instantly change to a system where all monopolies, not just the land monopoly, but the tech monopolies, everything just became revenue for the community, and basically housing costs, which are beyond painful, I should imagine. If you haven't got a great job, you're not going to have a good house. The housing becomes dirt cheap, and the economy becomes uber efficient. It solves all the problems. But explain how you think your society in California would improve.
Well, it's all the same prescriptions, or the predictions. Let me just give an example. The surface parking lot, the feature of Southern California. Okay, why on earth is the majority maybe of the land, at least a significant fraction of some of the most valuable land in the world, a surface parking lot? Right there, that tells you that the value of the land has not been incorporated into the decisions properly, right? So there's a lot of discussion in LA specifically about building new housing, and there's a tension between single family regions, more urban regions. The single family regions don't want apartments or big buildings near them, and there's all these clashes. It ends up in court. It takes years. But what people are not talking about is, what about the land that's already there in the urban core, which is not being used well,
Yeah.
right? There's a Home Depot in downtown LA with a parking lot of the size that you'd expect in suburbia, right? It's crazy. And then there's, in addition, a lot of LA is these strip malls with a parking lot out front. So no
Mm.
wonder there's not enough land for housing, and housing is very expensive when the land is not used well. That's the part that's just not talked about. So right away, any kind of assessment on the value of land um, makes that less attractive. You have to use the land in a more effective way. This would solve so many problems. Just that, even if it was a partial solution, which I know you and Fred have talked about, is partial solutions will give partial outcomes. But for us, even that would be quite an advancement.
Yeah. It's I mean, I've dedicated my life to wildlife. How do we save wildlife? And California's got some great wildlife, yeah. But it's under a lot of threat. And you're always pushing to use more land. And if you tax that community created value, suddenly you better start making use of in fact, most of our cities and urban places could have way better housing or less than half the price, and it would be much closer together. We'd have
Yeah.
communities that would integrate with each other. And, one of my professional things I'm doing at the moment is how to integrate natural drainage and wildlife corridors into towns and cities. Yeah. So that could, I'm getting paid millions in grants to do that. But the reality is it would happen naturally
Yeah.
with that land value capture, the monopoly value.
Let me give you just one other example, which is a very current topic, which is our downtown LA. It's
Mm,
hit by the pandemic and basically never recovered. And it's almost like a semi ghost town. Not that extreme,
mm.
but certainly the volume of traffic is much less. But I was thinking, why is it that these people owning these buildings, essentially they can hang on to a failed business model, which is that those buildings are office buildings indefinitely, right? And they can essentially destroy the whole downtown and take all the rest of the businesses that are struggling, they can take them with it, because there's no incentive for them to change how they're using the land. It
It,
destroys that whole region, because there's no reason for them to do anything except just wait for government. Essentially, what they're waiting for is a government bailout to give them some
yeah,
services, provide some infrastructure that then allows them to charge the rents again, as soon as people come back. So
yeah.
uh,
I'm sure one of your politicians will come up with, "We've got an urban regeneration scheme. We're going to put
that's
$20
it.
billion into this area," and then those slum landlords just go, "Excellent,
Yeah.
tax-free millions to put into my back pocket."
Meantime, it's a dead town.
Yeah.
A lot of places, existing shop owners, there's no traffic. They can't make a living. They're going out
Mm.
of business. I mean, it's just crazy, right?
It is. It's all crazy. The more you look into the Henry George concept, the more you just want to bang your head against the brick wall. How come society is so stupid that they don't understand these basic, super basic economic systems that would solve every problem we face?
Well,
Poverty.
I want to say, there's an educational system in all
Mm,
countries, and in this country, and maybe others, probably others, right? It's influenced a lot by, uh, we call them the landowners, right? So the politically
yeah.
powerful people, and I'm just thinking back to what I was taught and not taught, and as I was saying at the beginning, if you go by what I was taught, the world doesn't make any sense, right? It's the things that people were not taught that you have to know. And unfortunately, if they're not taught, it's not so easy to find that unless you're looking.
Yeah. I mean, I remember once hosting a conference at my work, which had some pretty heavy hitting economists from Cambridge and Oxford, top universities in the UK. None of them had heard of Henry George. I was with
Yeah.
a friend. I was with a friend of mine who was believe it or not, he used to be the policy director of the Countryside Landowners Association, which you thought would be an organization that would not be Georgist, right? All those old English toffs, with their tweed jackets. But he understood Georgism perfectly. And we literally lectured because I was taking them around one of my wildlife parks, seeing wolves and bears and things. And we just spent 2 hours just lecturing them on Henry George, and their mouths were like,
Yeah.
you can't be right, you can't be right. And you could see, and these guys were, in their 40s, made it to top jobs at Oxford and Cambridge University.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so it's not just elementary and high school education, it extends all the way to higher education. And the fundamental you can call it flaw or the faulty assumption is that land is capital.
Yeah.
Right? Land is not capital. And in Fred's book, Power in the Land, he gives some very convincing explanations, right? One is that land doesn't depreciate. In fact, it appreciates, right? Capital, you have to use it or else you're going to lose money. But land, it's not the case.
Yeah.
So, and then, of course, in other works, it's made clear that this was a deliberate choice to try to obscure the true nature of things, right? By you can call them landowners, right?
Well, I mean, I've managed to, be a chief executive and have some pretty high up jobs. And I know just how evil these people who climb the greasy pole are. They will learn, you learn who are your masters, rich folk, where the money trickles down, and you learn to keep your mouth shut if you want advancement. I've always been a renegade, so I've always relied on my natural autistic genius to push through, and 8 times out of 10 that works, but sometimes it doesn't. But it's a grim world where there is a pyramid of power. And all you do is not criticize above and kick below to rise in that pyramid. And
Yeah.
it's social conditioning. I think it's more than social conditioning. I think humans have literally been selected for it for 10,000 years because somebody would kill you if you got too uppity. Yeah.
I think that's right. There's we see this in societies, this essentially privatization of the rents, right? You see this happening in societies over thousands of years in all different parts of the world. And I hate to say it, but it's an innate human tendency, I would say, to if you see the opportunity, to increase your own resources, then in general people will take it. And so it is the people doing this. Yes, it's very aggravating and frustrating. But on the other hand, you can say most people, if given the opportunity and they see other people doing it, they will also do that, right? So it's an innate human tendency, I think, to try to do that, meaning privatize the rents and enhance their own resources, and that's the human tendency. I think it's challenging to fight against. I mean, sorry, just to elaborate on that, just real quick, you and Fred have identified the key problem, which is the homeowner, the average homeowner.
Yeah.
Myself, yourself, right? We have our house. We have the value associated with the location. It's hard to convince people to give that up, right? That's the central challenge.
People would, I call it the smash our babies' heads against rocks problem, in that the rent seekers would rather cause a civil war and therefore they have in the past.
Yeah.
They would rather have civil war and literally do things like smash babies' heads against rocks than give up the accumulated economic rent that they've acquired.
Yeah.
And that's it's something the wider Georgist movement don't look at the harsher evolutionary side and cruelty side of just how bad humans can be to
Yeah.
each other.
And Fred had an interview or something I saw on YouTube where he pointed out these people that you're talking about, the rent seekers in Russia, in the Bolshevik Revolution, they were
Yeah,
unwilling, the Tsar was unwilling to make any changes, and that ended very badly. In China, it's the same thing.
yeah.
And, who knows where we're heading at the moment in a lot of Western countries, but, it can't be good.
It's geopolitics. Looking at geopolitics through the Georgist lens is fascinating. It gives you a whole new meaning to why wars happen, why
Yeah.
the long-term control. I mean, once it used to be Britain in control. Not anymore. We're pretty powerless. We hang on your coattails. But now you can see that every decision that America makes in foreign policy is meant to get control of rents of other countries.
And let me give you an example that's very timely. It's the mass migration from Central South America to the US, big political issue right now. When you go and look at Guatemala and these other countries, you find extreme land concentration, right?
Yeah.
So the people there, they're dispossessed from the land. They can't make a living. Some of them have essentially no choice, and they're taken into gangs, right? Which do all sorts of terrible things. Others try to escape, and they end up at our border, right? And is this at all surprising? Not really. These countries were destabilized by rent seekers, 50 plus years ago, who wanted the land for bananas and sugar and so on, right?
Yeah. And Henry George spoke about this as a journalist, not just in his books, because it was all about Chinese laborers coming over to do the infrastructure on the Pacific coast. Fred's talked about this as well. If you want to solve immigration, legal immigration, take away the causes of them coming. Don't try to put a wall. It would be so easy to solve if we had a land value capture, monopoly capture system in every country. Nobody would want to come to America.
Yeah.
No offense, but if they had education, healthcare, their own land, a really productive economy, they wouldn't make any journeys.
That's the thing. These journeys are awful. No one in their right mind would choose to do such a thing unless there was no other choice, right? And that's the reality, is they feel like they have no other choice.
Yeah, they're facing death. And
it is, I wanted to mention, it's a bit of a tragedy on the other side, where you have countries like Cuba, where this, I don't think it's the correct fight between capitalists and the proletariat, essentially, right, are fighting each other, where it's actually really, in my view, the landowner is the hidden variable that's ultimately giving rise to these conflicts, right?
Yeah.
And that economic system has also, not really been that successful for many reasons, you could say, but those people are fleeing their country.
I mean, I've got a soft spot for Cuba. This probably horrifies most Americans. But if they had free direct trade, in the sense of free external trade, their system would work probably better than the American system.
There's certainly a case to be made for that. It's very hard to say one way or the other, because the U.S. policy towards these kind of countries, Cuba and so on, has been atrocious, right? And it's essentially strangled the country.
Yeah. And they've done some amazing things. Their healthcare and education is remarkable for the headwinds. I still think Fred describes this in great detail. It's the difference between Taiwan and China. It's the same argument, right? Taiwan had quite a heavy land value capture system from Dr. Sun Yat-sen setting
Yeah.
it in place with Chiang Kai-shek. And they had land reform right at the end of the 40s when they all had to escape the communists. And their economy absolutely, well, they're probably the best electronic engineering country in the world. They produce the best chips. They're amazing in some way. That system has been corrupted, unfortunately. So, like all these systems, and China has taken a long while to rise. They were in destitution for a long time, but they're still inefficient. And even China supposedly has some form of, they still hold up the teachings of Dr. Sun Yat-sen. I spent a few weeks with a Hong Kong vet last month, so I learned a lot about. The official position is to venerate Dr. Sun Yat-sen, even in the communist part of it. But if only you could take if Taiwan was free from control by America and international financial forces, they could have kept on with a full-on land value capture, and they would have been a nirvana now, much better.
Yeah.
And maybe it would be Taiwan that was taking over mainland China, and probably geopolitically, it's going to be China taking over Taiwan.
Yeah.
Probably like Hong Kong. They won't call it, they'll allow them to run, but slowly America's influence is going to wane and China's influence, and then they'll call themselves one country, two systems, and it'll be like Hong Kong. Take 20 years. But
Yeah.
the wrong system's going to win. And that's what if we allowed one of these communist countries like Cuba to get that land value sharing, but then get real capitalism in goods and services,
Yeah.
it would be
And
unbelievable.
and that's my one point I wanted to mention is in the communist takeover, there were a lot of innocent people that were harmed in the takeover, and
Yeah.
it's very sad because it didn't need to be that way. As you're saying, if you just can distinguish, this is the key, between earned and unearned income.
Mm.
The fight, this artificial fight between proletariat and bourgeoisie, or so whatever you want to call it, it's not properly distinguishing between the fact that many of these shop owners legitimately earned their money, or they made use of capital, and they had a right to some of that return that they got. But on the other hand, there was part of it that was due to the community effort, this unearned income, which should have been used to fund the government. And that distinction is, unfortunately, in history, it wasn't made, and it's a shame because the ideas were there in time, right? The ideas in the 20th century, the ideas were all there, but the other views of the world kind of took over at that, and it's a shame. Well,
In
even
all these,
Trotsky, right? Trotsky
yeah.
was a Georgist.
Yeah. There were many thoughts originally in early socialist or communist Russia. In post-revolutionary, it wasn't that much of a revolution. In post-Tsar Russia, there were many paths to follow. Unfortunately, it's the guys with the guns and the ruthless philosophy that wins the day. And Georgism offers a revolution without the bloodshed.
Yes.
But unfortunately, revolutions don't happen because it's the
It's
people with
not
the
an
power.
emotion. It's not
Yeah.
an emotional argument or motivation which really animates people. It's you can call it technocratic tax policy, really, right?
Yeah,
It's hard to capture revolutionary fervor with such a
absolutely.
policy, unfortunately. Yeah.
Well, you probably, like I, get attacked from both sides of the political spectrum. So the right wing see me as worse than communism, for advocating monopoly value capture, and the left wing see me as the worst type of free market evangelist possible. And a lot of people I work with in the environmental field are very left wing, and they'll hear me say things and they'll nod, and then suddenly I'll say something in support of the free market as a
Mm.
mechanism
Yeah.
if it contains externality and monopoly. So I always say I'm the most rabid free marketer there is. As long as every price you pay for something contains the externalities of what has caused that product to come to being,
Right.
and the monopolies have
Yeah.
been extracted. So we put in the externalities and we extract the monopolies, right?
Yeah.
And they people can't think, why could somebody be like this? We are different to
Yes.
the mainstream humans.
Yes. I mean, in U.S. right now, it's democratic socialists, right, which are
Yeah.
the equivalent kind of what you're saying, and they're making progress. But there's just it's inevitable. There's going to be a clash between that side and you call them the capitalists, who
Yeah.
view democratic socialists as taxing them out of existence, or taking private enterprise into the state. And it's a very tough place to be in the middle, which is where Georgism is, which is both sides have a point, but we have to distinguish unearned and earned income.
Yeah. The trouble with the centrists that we have in the UK, the Tony Blairs, the Keir Starmers, and centrists that you have, the last vice president presidential candidate, Kamala Harris, is, I feel, we take the best of the right and the best of the left and bring them together. The centrists we have in power take the worst of the left and the worst of the right and put them together.
Yeah. Well, that's a challenge. I wish we knew what to do about it.
Well, it's because they're funded by billionaires. Let's face it.
So I think that's the most accurate. Well, you can call them 21st century landowners, right? Which includes, as you and Fred have talked about in recent videos, the spectrum, radio spectrum, low Earth orbit rents, or land. You can call it low Earth orbit land, spectrum land. These are the new land properties of the 21st century, and we have people. They take all those rents for themselves. That's what they're doing.
It is. And politicians, I think, are like advertisers, right? The whole point of all advertising is to occupy the minds of people, right? So I've got a one that I've told Fred, not very keen on it, but basically your attention is a monopoly in itself, right? So there should be some way of capturing that value, basically making it more expensive to get a hold of your attention and democratize, stop people monopolizing your attention. And all the weird things that go on in California. Oh, all your Peter Thiels and who's the one who owns Oracle.
Yeah.
Everything is about occupying people's time and attention. Facebook, everything is about making sure they hold the attention of minds, and politicians are being paid to do exactly the same. It's like some Kafkaesque. It's almost. I would even go so far as that other famous Georgist who wrote The Brave New World. It's a nasty dystopia of people's attention. And what I say about Georgists like ourselves is we're normally a little bit on the autistic spectrum, high functioning, obviously, but we're kind of immune to that sort of rubbish. Yeah, it doesn't work with me. I don't watch any mainstream news or thought at all. It's just, it's barefaced lies as I see it. I can't watch the BBC anymore. I just get too angry.
Yeah. And I would say, and this was from the days of Marx, that part of what he was saying is the media and what people see and perceive is owned by, call it the landowning class. And you're talking about the 21st century version of that. Absolutely. The media, the big, this, topic of debate, shall we say, in the US is this merger between Paramount and Warner Brothers, so that it would put the Ellisons in charge of even more of the media landscape, and they control what people see. Absolutely. But I can say that the good thing we can say is we have YouTube. To be honest, how I would have found all this information without the internet and YouTube and so on. and people can get their information, I guess, for better or for worse, but at least it's not through the filter of the media companies, through TikTok,
Hmm.
YouTube, etc. You can say, well, people can believe all kinds of crazy things, and maybe they do, but they also at least have a chance to not get the narrative controlled by these companies, right? So that's a positive thing.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. So let's come back to California because we want to wrap up our chat. Obviously, Proposition 13 and wealth taxes and all the things that are going around. California seems to be at the absolute sharp edge of the Georgist dystopian vision of ultra rent consumption by the rich from the poor. So, what's happening? Tell us what you think's happening now and what's going to happen in the future.
Well, there's the wealth tax debate, which is, it's the same argument as has happened for 100 years. It's the
Yeah,
poor versus the rich, essentially, right? And the
yeah,
poor very legitimately are struggling to afford to live in California, whereas on the other side you have centibillionaires and trillionaires. So naturally, they want a wealth tax. Of course, this is driving a reaction from not just billionaires, but also well-off, shall we say, people who own a business and are afraid of being the next people to get taxed. And so, what's going to happen? That's a hard question. I think I'm not sure what's going to happen. Um, Proposition 13, that continues to I would say haunt us.
yeah.
Looking at it through the lens of Georgism, this was the biggest economic rent giveaway that you could imagine. But I did want to mention, to you and Fred, maybe a topic for a future episode, is that proposition was based on legitimate concerns, which is that people on fixed incomes and retirees were getting priced out of their homes.
Yeah.
Whether there was, I'm sure, other nefarious motives by large landowners who, of course, benefited far more than the average homeowner, but they were able to take that legitimate concern and get the proposition passed, right? So that's, I think, the concern I hear from people is if we have a tax associated with land or location, which is not tied to income, what if you can't pay it? That's an important challenge, right? You can't politically, you just can't have people being chased out of their homes.
Well, as Fred would say, it's who you're paying it to. Are you going to pay it to somebody private, or are you going to pay it to the state or the collective or whatever you want to say? But the reality is, any system of capturing monopoly rents, location values, etc., has to be phased in very carefully, and there has to be a system of certainly for people who've passed retirement age who can't earn being able to offset it, and that's a charge on the land. I mean, I don't know the
Yeah.
legal situation, but having something where it just racks up onto a charge when the land's sold, it comes off.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Deferment,
yeah,
right? There
yeah,
are
yeah,
straightforward solutions. And,
yeah,
Proposition 13, it could have been different.
yeah,
We could have said, well, okay, if you can't pay, just defer, right? And
yeah.
then when the land is sold, then we'll reconcile, right? But of course, the major people who benefited from that proposition would not have liked that.
No, of
The
course
other
not.
thing, which is very bad about Proposition 13, is you can pass on those tax benefits to your children.
Yeah,
So
that's
we are creating in this state, UK's landed gentry, essentially,
yeah,
right? It's a terrible policy. If you talk to the average person, they think it's great, right?
yeah,
But that's and there is the problem, right? To on an individual basis, it is a rational, good policy in the sense that they pay less property tax, right? But when you aggregate that overall, and you understand that it's causing all of these other problems that really do affect people's quality of life and their ability for their kids to
mhm,
find housing, right?
yeah. I
That's
mean,
the link. Yeah.
something I've talked with Fred about California is the technical revolution, which came out of the Second World War and the electronics industry that built in the 60s and 70s into what it's become today is essentially collecting rents from around the world and putting them into land values in California.
Yeah.
It's literally, Google, every payment to Google, every payment to what do they call them? Macintosh. I'm sorry, I'm
Apple.
anti-Mac. Yeah, I'm anti-Apple. I've never bought or owned an Apple product. I've always said, what is it? It's a tax on the rich and stupid. It's really cruel. I just wanted to say that as a anti-Apple user, because I'm not into form over function. I'm only a function person. But it's all capitalized into the land. Now, people like Peter Thiel understand that. They've written about it. They've even said that my investment is just going to pay landowners in California. Startup companies and the deadweight costs on California could have been literally like some kind of Star Trek nirvana. There was that much wealth, and the social progress could have been beyond question. You could have literally had the kind of best lifestyle that the best people, the richest people in California live. You could have had it for everyone, but it just disappeared into land values and made everybody's lives miserable. And eventually it'll destroy California, because the rise of China is probably on the land rents of California. You can't compete anymore. They will, the rise of other nations and their technology will literally outcompete Californian monopolies at some stage, and the California system will collapse, and then it will become hideous. Can you imagine what would happen if you lose all those industries?
Yeah.
It
Well,
would be
the system, it's not stable, right? That's
no.
the problem, because you have a significant amount of the population that can't afford to live, right? It's a recipe for instability. And we see that, right? Look at the politics everywhere, right?
It is. I met a few people, interesting people. Right, Austin, anything else we should cover?
Maybe I'll leave you with one final thought of how the landowners can get it going both ways, meaning benefit both ways. So you mentioned in the first part the Central Valley, or the growers, farmers, and how they're pumping so much water that it's causing subsidence of the land, the land sinking.
Yeah.
So first of all, they're pocketing all the rents, all the resources that they did nothing to produce. It was there for them. They just took it. Now, all the roads, infrastructure, etc., that's damaged by the land subsiding, guess who gets to pay for that?
Yeah, the workers.
The taxpayer, right? So they're getting it both ways. It's just a remarkable, right?
Oh, there's so many cons. Have you heard of Professor Mason Gaffney?
Yes, I do. Yes, now have heard of him. Yeah.
Yeah. So Mason, his work on this subject is, the best, and he's doing it from the 60s. He was at one of the universities of California. His how he looked at water rights and those other land rights, it's frightening. And there's even more than just their ownership, their rights that they got for free, that they extract
were stolen.
from.
They were all
They were stolen.
right? Yeah.
They
stole them first, and they've got them now for 150 years or something.
Yeah, and every part of your life, what you pay for water, the California fires where they didn't have enough water because the water rights are all owned by these grandfathered rights of somebody who had water next to the river or whatever. It's everything is creating the costs on your living astronomical.
Yes.
And the soil, the very soil is full of selenium. It's all kinds of ecological, because it's been farmed unsustainably.
Yeah.
And you see, where I come from, it's California is just the sharp end of what our dystopian future is. Land that can't support food anymore.
Yeah.
Food becoming more and more expensive because we're just trying to rip nature apart to feed ourselves voraciously now, and there's nothing for the future.
Yeah.
And I mean, it'll take hundreds of years to happen. I don't want to be a doom merchant. Yeah. I've got a very nuanced view of environmental degradation. The planet can absorb a lot of harm before it's hurt, but it is happening.
Yes.
Farming is perhaps the most dangerous thing you can do to the planet. All this soil oxidizes and it gets full of the wrong chemicals, and then we have to make more chemicals to pour on it to fix the problems we've created. It's endless, and it's the sharp end is California. It's all your blooming walnut growers and people like that. Anyway, it's been fantastic to speak to you, Austin.
Thank you so much.
You know, hopefully we'll speak again. Maybe you can think of a few issues you want to discuss. And I'm certainly fascinated by your experience. And welcome to the Georges community. May you continue to grow.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you and Fred and everyone else, and I'm looking forward to next time.
Excellent. Right. Take care.
Take care.